All praise the Creator. Peace and love to everyone. Absolutely. So today we're going to run through a couple of videos. And of course, remember that the Creator is not something you can touch, something you can physically feel with your hands, not something you can see. The Creator is not a physical entity. The Creator is not one of those fallen ones. The Creator is not a creation. In other words, just like you see me, if you see someone, I don't care who it is, and they say they created, they not. They are pretenders. The Creator is in you, and also a key to some things that is heaven is also in you. See, it's not about, your life is about what you do with it, but it is also about finding, or some people may say, because you can, if you want to, go to your highest estate. The devil is the one that tries to stop you from going to your highest estate. So what I'm attempting to do is show you in different ways. That's how he has been doing it.
Take a look at this painting by pt2 the Elder. It's a bunch of illustrations depicting common sayings. Think of it as a Where's Waldo for popular expressions. Whilst many of these are in Dutch, some of them carry on over into English. This soldier is armed to the teeth. Over here, the world has turned upside down. And finally, there's always a bigger fish. We use expressions like these every day, but have you ever wondered where they come from? For example, why shouldn't we cry over spilt milk? And who's going around killing two birds with one stone, or putting cats into bags? Turns out that many of our most beloved sayings have some intriguing and obscure origins, some of which are pretty dark. Did you know that the phrase, "saved by the bell," may have arisen out of fears of being buried alive? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Without further ado, let's explore the origins of popular sayings and expressions. Don't cry over spilt milk. The meaning of this saying is not particularly intuitive. In plain English, it means that there's no point in worrying about things that can't be changed. Who came up with this unusual lactose-based idiom? Well, it's not quite certain, but it was first recorded in a book of English proverbs in 1659, where it was written, "There's no weeping over shed milk." Some had suggested that this phrase may have come from Old English folklore, and that it's all to do with fairies. In rural areas, it is said that townsfolk would leave out a glass of milk for woodland sprites. If any of the milk was spilt, it is said that the fairies would still be able to drink it, meaning that it wasn't actually ever wasted, hence the phrase, "don't cry over spilt milk." Others have suggested a much more grounded origin. You see, milk spoils very quickly, and so spilling any on the floor means that it already has been wasted. It can't be recovered, so I guess there's no point in worrying about it. Don't cry over spilt milk. Fairies or not, the message remains the same. What's done is done, as Lady Macbeth once said. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. From Gala to Granny Smith, this Victorian saying encourages people to eat more fruit in order to avoid unwanted trips to the doctor's office. The rhyme was first printed in a Welsh magazine from 1866 as, "Eat an apple on going to bed, and you'll keep the doctor from earning his bread." This has changed over the years, from "an apple a day, no doctor to pay," to "an apple a day sends the doctor away." The version now commonly used first appeared in 1922, and seems to have stuck. Nutritionalists would recommend to eat more than just apples in your diet to remain healthy. There's unfortunately no correlation between the consumption of apples and the proximity of physicians, as the rhyme would suggest. But, interestingly, there was a time when the word apple was used to refer to any kind of fruit. So, perhaps the rhyme refers to eating fruit in general, and not just the red or green hand fruit that we're familiar with today. Kill two birds with one stone. This popular phrase encapsulates the idea of achieving two goals with one action. This saying may have come from ancient China. In Mandarin, there's this phrase, It translates to one arrow, double vultures, and carries the same idea as the English one. The expression is based on a folk tale about the legendary archery skills of General Zhang Sun Sheng. In an attempt to impress his soldiers, he shot a single arrow into the sky that brought down 2 vultures. If that wasn't impressive enough, he achieved this feat whilst on horseback. The first occurrence of this phrase in English is in the 1600s, where it was used by the philosopher Thomas Hobbes. We don't know how it crossed over into English. Thomas Hobbes was also the first to record the phrase, "the feather that broke the horse's back," although you'll probably be familiar with the more exotic equivalent, "the straw that broke the camel's back." Both expressions refer to when something reaches a tipping point, when a chain of seemingly minor events finally culminates into one big and sudden reaction, in this case, at the expense of a poor animal. For a lot of these animal-related sayings, they seem to be quite aggressive in nature. Take beating a dead horse, or grabbing a bull by the horns. Of all the animals, it seems that someone really had a problem with cats. Plenty of ways to skin a cat, letting the cat out the bag, or curiosity killed the cat, and so on. It's perhaps reassuring to know that cats are supposed to have 9 lives, or so I've been told. In any case, noticing how many common sayings depict violence against animals, the American animal rights organization PETA have drafted some new animal-friendly idioms that you can try out for yourself. So instead of killing 2 birds with 1 stone, it's feeding 2 birds with 1 scone. Instead of beating a dead horse, it's feeding a fed horse. And if you don't wish to grab a bull by the horns, then you may prefer to grab a rose by its thorns. Or maybe not. Whilst inventive, these animal-friendly sayings have not been unanimously accepted. We'll have to wait and see as to whether it catches on. Many idioms stem from the Bible. In fact, there's an entire book dedicated to them, the appropriately named Book of Proverbs. Some of these require a bit of thinking to figure out the meaning. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. In other words, nobody likes a grouch. Wine is a mocker and beer a brawler. Whomever is led astray by them is not wise. Which is to say, drink in moderation. On the other hand, there are plenty of Irish, German and Czech proverbs that would say otherwise.
Now see, that's how they tricked you with that, right? And that's what these churches try to tell you, just drink in moderation. And these camps tell you that that's not the case. You're not supposed to drink them at all because they have spirits inside these drinks. If you don't realize what's going on, remember these products that you're buying, especially when it comes to liquor and alcohol and stuff like that, are owned by 1%. But you know, the Rothschild has a lot to do with it. But actually it goes way bigger and deeper than the Rothschild, because at the end of the day, that beer and that liquor's owned by the devil. So of course what you think he would do with it.
Across the book of Proverbs, there are a bunch of sayings that contradict one another. One such instance is whether to listen to foolish people. One says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will become just like him." But another says, "Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes." Which one is it, Bible? Anyway, moving on. Beyond the book of Proverbs, there's one popular saying that I'm sure you've already heard. An eye for an eye. It's the idea that if you commit a crime, your punishment ought to match it. In this case, gouge out someone's eye and expect to lose one for yourself. You can find this saying in the Old Testament among a large list of other biblical laws. But this phrase didn't actually originate from the Bible. Instead, it may have been copied or even plagiarized from a much older legal text. You see, a very similar phrase can be found in the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi, in which it is decreed that if a man should blind the eye of another man, they shall blind his eye. The Code of...
A lot of y'all thought that was ours, it's not. See, a lot of these laws I keep telling y'all that they be coming out with, some of them be Babylonian, Egyptian, Sumerian. I can keep going, but it's the outside nations laws, fam. You gotta research everything you read.
Hammurabi was written in 1750 BCE, so it predates the biblical laws by 1,000 or so years, in which case this saying may be the oldest proverb that's still in use today. Speak of the devil. There are some phrases which sound biblical but aren't, particularly those to do with Satan. Speak of the devil is a phrase used when someone who's been talked about coincidentally appears in the room. The origin of this phrase goes back to an old fear that it was dangerous to talk about the devil. Even mentioning Satan's name, like I'm doing now, could cause him to appear. Hence, the original way of putting it, speak of the devil, and he doth appear. This superstition faded over time, and the expression became less and less impactful. By the early 1800s, it was seen as simply unlucky. By the end of the century, it was a saying used to discourage eavesdropping. Nowadays, it's just part of everyday conversation, and no longer a way to summon Lucifer. At least, I hope. On a quick side note, speak of the devil and he doth appear has a positive equivalent. Talk of angels and hear the flutter of their wings. You may already be aware from my other videos that angels in the Bible are not so, well, angelic.
He said, listen, the people say this instead of saying the old way now, and it means the exact same thing. That is crazy.
In the Old Testament, they are sometimes depicted as floating wheels covered in eyes, elsewhere as animal-human hybrids, again coated in eyes from heads to toes. At the risk of being visited by either, perhaps it's best I move on. Saved by the bell. Let's continue to explore the idioms with dark origins, starting with saved by the bell, which is used when a person is rescued by something at the last moment. Aside from being the namesake of a cheesy 80s sitcom, some believe that it's to do with being buried alive. In the 19th century, there was a mass panic over premature burial, which is to say, the doctors would falsely pronounce a sleeping person dead and they would be buried, only to wake up in their own coffin. To reassure families, inventors made a so-called safety coffin. A small string was wired inside a coffin that was attached to a bell on the surface. If the unfortunate person somehow woke, they'd be able to ring the bell and help would swiftly arrive. Hence, saved by the bell. This story, however, is not the only proposed origin of the phrase. Some believe that it has nothing to do with premature burial at all, but instead came about from boxing slang. In a typical boxing match, if you were losing a bout and were about to go down, you would hope for the bell to ring that marked the end of the round. You could be saved by the bell to prevent a knockout. Who knows, maybe this saying doesn't have a dark origin after all. That's more than can be said for this next idiom. Bite the bullet. Although nowadays this expression is about confronting difficult situations, in America during the Civil War it had a very different meaning. The term supposedly originated in field hospitals, where wounded soldiers were taken to undergo amputations. In a time before anesthesia was widely available, soldiers had to clench their teeth down on something to cope with the pain of surgery. Often it was with anything that was lying about. In a battlefield, that was usually spare ammunition. I suspect they'd be visiting the dentist shortly after. It's not just common sayings. Many nursery rhymes are believed to have dark and disturbing origins as well. If you'd like to learn where the Ring of Roses is about the plague, as some believe, then consider watching my video on the dark side of nursery rhymes. It goes without saying that there are many expressions out there. Proverbs, idioms and sayings are a feature across all languages and cultures. They provide a useful way to condense big ideas into short and memorable sentences. In English in particular, there are thousands of proverbs, perhaps helped by the fact that so many people across the world speak the language. As a result, many of our popular sayings have these interesting and obscure origins. But we've only managed to look at a small handful. There's so much more of them to cover. If there are some popular sayings you'd like to see explored in a future video, do share them down below in the comments. But for now, let's leave it there. What you're listening to is the Hymn music that actually could be reconstructed. It was discovered in the royal palace of Ugarit, northern Canaan, now modern-day Syria, and is believed to date back to 1600 BCE, some 3,400 years ago. The song itself is inscribed on a small clay tablet and was discovered in the early 1950s, along with 36 other tablets. But the Hurrian hymn number 6 is the only tablet that was preserved well enough to be read, and eventually performed. The tablet itself contains instructions for a song on a lyre, an instrument that looks like a small harp, and is written in a dialect of the ancient Hurrian language. It also includes partially obscured lyrics that appear to be a prayer to Nika, the goddess of orchards. The version you see on screen is a translation by Hans Johann Theo, and is considered to be the closest to the original spirit of the song. Whilst the Hurrian hymn is the oldest piece of music that can be reconstructed, it is not the oldest song that exists. That title goes to the Lipit Ishtar, which is another tablet discovered in Sumer, modern-day Iraq, but this time from 1950 BCE, roughly 4,000 years ago. It's made up of instructions on how to play a hymn, but the trouble is, it's only a small fragment of a large piece of work, and so its instructions do not give us enough information to reconstruct the actual song. The oldest form of music, in its broadest sense, is the many musical instruments, mostly bone flutes, that have been unearthed in prehistoric excavation sites. The oldest musical instrument ever discovered is the Hohe Fels flute, dated to around 35,000 to 40,000 years ago, making it the earliest evidence of music ever being performed by humans. And whilst we're still able to produce a sound on these instruments, we don't know what kind of songs were performed on them. So, back to the Hurrian hymn. Decoding the song itself proved to be a challenge. Unlike our standard sheet music, which notates pitch and duration, the Hurrian hymn gives instructions.
I want y'all to pay attention because a lot of folks think that the creator likes the harp, but you have to find out that the devil actually tricked folks to actually play the harp while singing pagan songs to them.
Instructions on where a musician needs to position their fingers on the instrument. It doesn't give any information on how the lyre was tuned, nor does it give lengths and durations of the notes. Then finally, to make it more confusing, the interval system on the tablet was unclear, and required some creative thinking to figure out. The first attempt to decode it was in 1974 by Dr. Anne Kilmer. There are no performances of her version online, so here's a digitized edition of her song. By far the most popular attempt was Dr. Richard Dumbrill in 1998. His version sounds as follows.
I skipped that part. We need to have them singing the pagan song.
Link them in the description below, as well as academic papers and links for any further reading. And whilst the real melody of the Hurrian hymn will be likely lost to history, these reconstructions act as a bridge to the music of ancient and forgotten peoples. Angels. Even if you haven't touched the Bible, you probably have an idea of what they look like. They're those elegant, heavenly beings with long white robes, swan-like wings, and perhaps a halo on top for good measure. We also know what angel babies, or cherubs, look like. Those small, chubby, cute infants clasping a bow and arrow. The kind of thing you might see on a Valentine's Day card. Except, well, that's not what angels actually look like. Not according to the Bible. These
are the fallen ones.
Are biblically accurate angels. These horrifying abominations are more suited to an H.P. Lovecraft novel, not really the Bible. So what are these things? Why do they look this way? And how have we got angels so wrong? Okay, so angels come from the Old Testament, the first half of the Bible for Christians, or the whole Bible, known as the Tanakh, for Jews. The Old Testament was written down in modern-day Israel and Palestine from about the 6th century BCE to the 3rd century BCE. Although many scholars believe the biblical stories themselves are much older, we get the word angel from the Greek angelos, originally from the Hebrew word malach, which roughly translates to messenger. These messengers appear in the Old Testament a number of times. They carry God's messages from heaven and earth and sometimes act on his behalf. For example, you might recognize the angel of death in the Passover story that slaughtered all the first sons of the Egyptians, or perhaps the angel that struck 70,000 Israelites to death and the angel that single-handedly killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one night. When they appear in the Bible, they are described as having wings. In fact, they look like any ordinary person. In the later biblical texts, such as Daniel, some even get names: Gabriel, Raphael, and Michael. Okay, this all sounds familiar, but they're not quite the nightmare material freak abominations we saw before. The angels, known as malach, are not the only heavenly beings in the Bible. There's a hierarchy of them, and depending on who you ask, your classic humanoid angels are actually pretty far down the ladder. In the Middle Ages, a Jewish scholar known as Maimonides drew up a hierarchy of angels, and if you look here, your classic humanoid angels, the malach, are pretty low down, but not quite as low as cherubim. Forget those chubby-winged angels. According to the Bible, cherubim are animal-human hybrids. The first time you see them is in the book of Genesis, right after Adam and Eve have been kicked out the garden. Their job is to guard the Garden of Eden from mankind. Our best description of cherubim comes from the book of Ezekiel. It opens with the prophet experiencing a profound vision. In his vision, Ezekiel describes them as living creatures, but they're later revealed in chapter 10 as cherubim. His account is as follows. In the middle of it was something like 4 living creatures. This was their appearance. They were of human form. Each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and their soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. Each of them moved straight ahead, without turning as they moved. As for the appearance of their faces, the 4 had the face of a human being, the face of a lion on their right side, the face of an ox on their left side, and the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wing of another, while 2 covered their bodies. Each moved straight ahead. Wherever the spirit would go, they went, without turning as they went. In the middle of the living creatures, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches moving to and fro among the living creatures. The fire was bright, and lightning issued from the fire. The living creatures darted to and fro, like a flash of lightning. The cherubim don't look like your average angel. Instead, they look more like the mythical beasts in ancient Mesopotamia, especially the Babylonian Iyamasu, which is the wings of an eagle, the body of a lion, and the head of a king. These would act as guardians to sacred places like temples, or the palace, or city walls, and performed a similar role to the biblical cherubim. They look similar to their Egyptian cousin, the Sphinx, or the Hittite griffin. Many believe that these biblical angels were descendants of these mythological creatures from Mesopotamia. There would have been a lot of cultural exchange, and the same sorts of mythical creatures would crop up across these regions. Cherubim in later Christianity may have been imported from Greek and Roman myths, borrowing from the shapes of Cupid or Pluto. Moving up the list, we get these guys, seraphim. They have 6 wings, 2 used for flying, and the other pair for covering the angel's face, and the third pair for covering the angel's feet. They're described in the book of Isaiah as follows. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings, with 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called the other and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, and the whole earth is full of his glory. In medieval Christian theology, seraphim is the highest choir of the angelic hierarchy. They are the caretakers of God's throne, again continuously singing, Holy, 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 all day, every day. So, seraphim, their name comes from the word seraph, to burn. So seraphim may mean something like the burning ones. Okay, well, where do they come from? Going further into seraphim's name reveals its origins. The Hebrew word for a venomous serpent of the desert is saraph. In ancient Egypt, the cobra was often referred to as the flaming one, an image of which, called a uraeus, was worn by the pharaoh. Thus, saraph may be the Hebrew term for cobra, and perhaps where our seraphim get their winged appearance from. Now we're getting to the strangest beings in the Bible.
See more fallen ones, old snakes.
eyeball, the ophani, or simply known as the wheels. They're a pair of interlocking gold wheels with eyes around the outside, and they hover and float in the sky. In the same vision as before.
Now this is a spaceship. The eyes are the windows. And they can see folks looking out the windows. He didn't understand. He just spoke about the best way he could. You're flying saucers and other things.
Or Ezekiel describes them alongside the cherubim. Quote, "As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures, one for each of the four of them. As for the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl, and the four had the same form, their construction being something like a wheel within a wheel. When they moved in any of the four directions without veering as they moved. Their rims were tall and awesome, for the rims of all four were full of eyes all around. When the living creatures moved, the wheels moved beside them. And when the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose. Wherever the spirit would go, they went, and the wheels rose along with them. For the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. The wheels are beings who are meant to carry God's throne, making them some of the holiest and certainly the strangest beings in the Bible. Where do these wheels come